If we have some doors at home that we are not fully convinced by their color, style, or we are simply tired of them, today we are going to talk about how to renovate them in an easy and economical way. Let's get started. Although it may not seem like it, changing the doors of the house gives a very different touch to our home. We can achieve a much more modern or much brighter room. The thing is, until we've changed these doors, we can't see all the potential they had. So I encourage you, if you don't like your doors, to give them a breath of fresh air and a change of styles. With these techniques, we're going to start from the premise that each one of us has completely different doors. So I'm going to talk about all the techniques you can use, and you can employ the one that suits you best. It could be that we've already painted our doors before, and this is the second time we're painting them, or they might be in their original state, or perhaps they're varnished. The point is that these techniques are useful for all types. The first technique we could use would be to sand them and leave them in their original color. The most important thing about this technique is to first make sure we're going to like the original color, of course. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to do a test. In this case, we're going to sand the door a little bit, or we're going to strip it a tiny bit to see if this natural color of the door fits us or not. Once we have checked it, if we see that it fits us, then we proceed to remove the paint from the varnish, whatever we have. We have several options to remove what we have on our door. The first would be to apply heat to remove it. The second would be to use a stripper, and the third would be to sand. For all of life. You already know that in the apartment, I am restoring the original doors. I am trying to get the color they used to have. It's a very beautiful color, and I think it's worth saving. And out of all the techniques I've used, which have been all of them, the one that has worked best for me, it has been the hot air gun for the paint and sanding for the varnish. Let's start talking about hot air guns. This machine is very cheap. In fact, we can find it on the market from 25 to 30 euros. In this case, I bought one that cost 28. It works well and is very easy to use. It's like a dryer. We turn it on and start applying heat to the paint. Bubbles start to form, and with a scraper, we start removing it in a simple and easy way. It is true that it is a slow process, as we have to do it all over the door and we have to wait for it to heat up. The ease of removal will depend a bit on the hands, the layers, let's say the door has, and also on the power of our hot air gun. But generally it tends to go quite well. As for the sanding technique, in case we have a varnish on our door, what I did was use a sander. In this case, it's a good quote because I used a bad one. And it broke, well, my grandmother used it in this case, and one of the pegs that is attached to the sandpaper broke. In short, it was a disaster. Then I switched to a good one. What I did was use an 80 grit sandpaper, which is a very coarse grain that is going to leave a bit. The door is a bit frayed. Are some threads going to come out? In this case, they were barely visible, but it could happen that they would be visible then. Once we have applied this 80 grit sandpaper, we are then going to apply one of 240 grit, and thus we are going to leave a smooth effect. And when we run our hand over it, it's going to be completely smooth and beautiful. Would it be the fact of combining these two sandpapers, one coarse grit to remove the surface layer, and so it's easier for us to get to the original door and the other to give it a better finish? That's right, when sanding, we have to take several things into account, and this, watch out, be very careful, because when we are sanding with the coarse grain, if we get a little carried away, we can eat a chunk of the door, which in fact almost happened to me. We have to be a little careful when sanding, and also if we insist a lot on an area where we are there for a long time with the sander. It could be that we were eating away the layers and we reached the wood underneath, and this, well, we don't want that. Once we have applied the heat gun or have sanded, what we finally do is apply our transparent varnish and a woodworm prevention product, because the wood, when left natural, is more susceptible to woodworm. And then these little holes appear all over the door. By using these two products, we ensure that the door is completely finished and that it looks perfect. What are the advantages of restoring our doors and returning them to their original state? Well, the first one is that it's not going to chip, because in the case that we paint them, we have the possibility that if we hit them with some corner or something, the paint might chip off. And the second advantage is that we will achieve this natural tone that we would hardly achieve with any other technique. Personally, as I really like the color of natural wood, I think it's a good idea to restore the doors, but it also has its disadvantages, which we are going to talk about now. The main one, and for me, the one that might hold me back the most, is the fact that as we have precisely a natural color, it's going to be hard to find a filler that covers the holes and matches the color perfectly. It's going to be nearly impossible. So what happens? In the case that we have holes from the previous handle and it's a long handle, well, we're going to have to replace this handle with another one of the same size. Because if not, these holes will be visible and it won't look very nice. Even if we have holes from previous woodworm that the door has had, it will also be visible. Because if we apply the putty, it won't be exactly the same color and a bit of the contrast in tones will be visible. The second disadvantage, which is also a disadvantage to consider, is that it's a slow process. And in the case that we do it with the air gun, well, light is expensive, so you understand me. We are going to spend a little more money than if we choose to paint them. The second technique we can use is to paint our doors. We have used this technique a lot. We have painted all the doors in our house, the doors of my parents' apartment, my grandmother's. I mean, we have painted everything. The truth is that it has yielded excellent results, but it also has its pros and cons, which we'll explore next. But first, what is the process that needs to be followed to paint our doors? Well, the first thing we have to do is sand them, remove the first layer that is on the doors, whether it's paint, varnish, whatever, but we would remove the first coat. Next, we will give it 2 coats of primer, preferably, and between each coat of primer, we will let it dry for 24 hours. Once these 24 hours have passed after the second coat of primer, we would then move on to the paint. Using high-quality, water-based paint is crucial, as it's easier to clean up if any areas get stained. We can paint it with a paint gun or we can paint it with a roller. The paint gun gives a better finish. But it is true that if you don't have practice, it might get a bit more complicated. And also in terms of mess, it gets a lot dirtier than if we were to use a roller. In the case of paint guns, a gun can cost us between 30 and 40 euros. So I would almost tell you that it's not even worth renting or borrowing it, but simply buying it. It's a tool that we can also take advantage of, not only for painting doors, which in this case would be the same process for painting, say, a shelf, a piece of furniture, some chairs, anything we want to paint. We can use our spray gun. If we don't want to complicate our lives with the gun, then we paint with the roller. However, it's better to paint with a roller that is made of microfiber or Belurex. These are the ones in orange color. What are we going to do to the rollers before painting? We're going to wash them well, we're going to scrub there to rub and so that it releases the maximum amount of lint, which, although normally these types of rollers do not usually release much lint. But just in case, we have already washed it, we have let it dry completely the day before, and we are now going to proceed to paint our door. The final result is not as perfect as the one from the gun, but it also looks very good, so it has nothing to envy the gun either. If we want less mess, we can always do it with a roller. What would be, in this case, the main advantages of painting a door? The first one would be exactly what we discussed previously. That the holes are completely covered simply by applying putty to the holes, sanding a little bit and then painting over it. Well, it seems like there has never been a hole there. So we can put the handle that we like the most, that fits us the most, and whatever we want. Even if it has woodworm, we can cover it. The other great advantage is that we can paint it any color we want. That is, we don't have to opt for a white door, but we could paint it beige, turquoise, mocha color, these colors that match very well with other styles. And we can give it, well, that touch of color. Instead of giving it to the walls, we opt for the doors. Finally, one of the main advantages, and I would almost say it is the most important, is the speed with which we achieve the results. Likewise, we can paint a door, well, I don't know, in half an hour because, well, half an hour, right? Let's see, between one step and the next, of course, 24 hours have to pass with the primer and all that. But it is true that the process is very fast. If we add up all the parts where we have been painting, it might add up to half an hour, unlike looking for the original color, which in this case would take us much longer, since the process is slower. The main disadvantages that the first one also has would be that if we hit it dry, it might chip on us. And of course, when it comes to painting or repainting it, it's much more complicated because that little hole could be seen and be at different layer heights. The next disadvantage is that if we use an alkyd paint, our doors may yellow if there is not enough lighting in our house. There are paints that are oil-based, which would be, in this case, the alkyd ones. If it doesn't get natural light, it ends up taking on that yellowish white color. And I tell you from experience, it ends up looking pretty ugly. So should we look for a paint that could be an alternative to this one? And finally, the third technique we're going to use is to cover the entire door. We're not going to look for the original color anymore. We're not going to paint it, but we're going to cover it. In this case, we could use, for example, plywood. Plywood is a type of wood, usually laminated, although it can be medium density fiberboard, and there are all thicknesses. In this case, we could look for one that was 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters to cover our entire door. We could even form this kind of grooves that are now so popular in modern doors and give it, well, original shapes. We could make them to one side, we could place them in a herringbone pattern, or we could create whatever we want. Really, here we have a super open field of originality. That's for sure. If we are going to cover it, we have to take it into account. Then, when we close the door, we could put fuyola all over the door, but right where it's going to close all around the perimeter. Watch out so that you can close it properly later, because if not, it might not fit. And then we must also consider the handles, ensuring they aren't too thick to fit properly later. If we don't want to use fuyola, we can opt for moldings, which also look very nice and are widely used. In fact, there are doors that are already sold with moldings, but if our doors are smooth, if we want to give them a bit of relief texture and make them look good, we can place them. We would glue them and we could leave them in wood color, or we could choose to paint them either in white or any color. And finally, if we want to give a touch of modernity to our doors, either before painting them or leaving the natural tone, what we can do is make a small groove, as I was telling you, but instead of creating it with the fuyolas, we can do it with a router. We look for a special accessory for this, and keeping a distance of about 40-30 centimeters or whatever we consider, we are making some grooves in such a way that we create a much more modern and current door, and these would be the renovation techniques for our old doors. I hope it has been useful and helpful to you. On the Decorate Yourself channel, you are going to see a lot more about these techniques because I am basically doing all of them. I really hope it helps you, and well, we'll see each other very soon in upcoming videos. See you soon.